The wedding hall fell silent. The millionaire bride, Vanessa Parker, with a smile that could cut glass, pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the crimson wine spreading like a fresh wound across the pristine white aisle runner. "Before we exchange vows," she announced to the hundreds of stunned guests, "my maid, Grace, will clean this up right now." Her face, a mask of pale dread, Grace Williams, 6 months pregnant, was forced to her knees with a useless cloth. What she didn't know, what no one in that room could have predicted, was that this soul-crushing public humiliation would make the billionaire groom do the unthinkable and spark the fiery beginning of her greatest, most impossible dream. But before we dive into the full, shocking story, I need to know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and let's get started. Would you look at this bathroom? There are still water spots on the mirror. Do I have to do everything myself? Vanessa Parker's voice, sharp as a shard of glass, sliced through the quiet morning air of the Montgomery mansion. Grace Williams kept her eyes down, her gaze fixed on the marble floor as she reached for the glass cleaner again. "I'm so sorry, Miss Parker. I'll fix it right away." "You'd better. The wedding planner is coming at noon, and I will not be embarrassed by shoddy work." Vanessa deliberately knocked a heavy makeup brush off the counter. It clattered loudly on the floor. "Oh, and pick that up too." Grace bent down carefully, one hand instinctively supporting her pregnant belly. At 6 months along, even simple movements were becoming a chore, a slow, deliberate negotiation with her changing body. She watched as Vanessa swept away, her expensive silk robe trailing behind her like a royal train. Every single morning began this way in the Montgomery mansion, a sprawling estate nestled in the heart of Bel Air, Los Angeles. Grace's day started at 4:30 a.m. She would navigate 3 separate bus routes from her tiny, crumbling apartment in a less glamorous part of the city, slipping through the mansion's service entrance by 6 a.m. sharp. She was a ghost, a silent presence, invisible until someone needed something cleaned, fixed, or fetched. After repolishing every surface in the master bathroom until it gleamed, Grace headed downstairs to continue her morning routine. The mansion was a behemoth, 15,000 square feet of obscene luxury that took every ounce of her energy to maintain. As she dusted the priceless antiques in the cavernous living room, Margaret Montgomery, Ethan's mother, appeared in the doorway. "Good morning, Grace. How are you feeling today?" Margaret's voice was a stark contrast to Vanessa's. It was always kind, laced with genuine warmth. "I'm okay, Mrs. Montgomery. Thank you for asking." Margaret frowned, her eyes taking in the dark circles under Grace's eyes. "You look exhausted. Come, have some tea with me." "I should finish the living room before— Vanessa won't be down for at least another hour," Margaret insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Come on." In the enormous stainless steel kitchen, Carlos, the family chef, was preparing a breakfast fit for a king. He smiled the moment they entered. "Grace, I saved you some banana bread. Good for the baby." "Thank you, Carlos," Grace said, her voice thick with gratitude as she accepted the plate he pushed toward her. Margaret poured tea for both of them into delicate porcelain cups. "Have you had your checkup this week?" "Yesterday. The doctor says my blood pressure is a little high. Nothing serious yet." Grace didn't mention the concerned look in the doctor's eyes, or how he'd sternly told her to reduce stress, as if that were an option she could simply choose from a menu. "You work too hard," Margaret said, her frown deepening. "Especially in your condition." The sound of approaching footsteps made Grace stand up so quickly that a wave of dizziness washed over her. Ethan Montgomery walked into the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear. He gave a brief, distracted nod to the group before speaking into the device. We need to patch that security vulnerability before the public release. I don't care what it costs." His voice was firm, commanding, but not angry. At 32, Ethan Montgomery had built a tech empire from his college dorm room. His privacy software was now the gold standard, used by governments and multinational corporations worldwide. He was worth billions, yet he still dressed in simple jeans and t-shirts that probably cost more than Grace made in a month. He ended his call and grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. "Good morning, Mother." His eyes landed on Grace for a fraction of a second, a flicker of acknowledgement before moving on. "Morning, Ethan." "Dear, I was thinking," Margaret began, but the sharp, insistent click of heels on marble interrupted her. Vanessa swept into the kitchen. "There you are. We need to finalize the seating chart. My mother thinks her cousin shouldn't be seated next to the Hendersons." She glanced at Grace, her eyes narrowing. "Don't you have work to do?" Grace stood up immediately, leaving her half-finished tea. "Yes, Miss Parker. Excuse me." As she left, she heard Carlos mutter something in Spanish under his breath. She pretended not to understand, though she knew the word he used was bruja, witch. Back in the solitude of a guest bedroom she was cleaning, Grace pulled out her phone to check her messages. There was a missed call from the hospital in Detroit, where her mother was being treated for a chronic heart condition. The bills were piling up like a snowdrift, and Grace couldn't send nearly as much money as she wanted to. Below that was a text from her landlord. "Rent increase starting next month. 150 more. Take it or leave it." Grace pressed a hand against her belly, a wave of panic rising in her chest. "We'll figure it out," she whispered to her unborn child. "We always do." At noon, Grace was polishing a silver tea set when Vanessa's voice echoed through the house again. "Grace, the wedding planner is here. Bring coffee to the patio, now." The wedding planner, a thin, severe-looking woman with perfect hair, barely glanced at Grace as she served the coffee. Vanessa spread glossy photos across the patio table. "The Grand Plaza Hotel is perfect. $2 million for the wedding of the year." "It's quite a statement," the planner agreed, making a note on her tablet. 300 guests, a celebrity chef, a full-string orchestra, and the white carpet for the aisle is being custom-made in Italy. "Everything must be perfect," Vanessa repeated, her voice laced with steel. Grace moved silently, refilling their cups, trying to be invisible. Her back ached from standing all morning, a dull, persistent throb. "Oh, and we'll need extra help at the hotel tomorrow," Vanessa said suddenly, looking directly at Grace for the first time. "You'll report there instead of here. 6 in the morning." "Tomorrow?" Grace said before she could stop herself. "But tomorrow is my day off." Vanessa's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "Is your job not important to you, Grace? I can easily find someone else who wants steady employment. Someone who isn't burdened." The unspoken word, pregnant, hung in the air between them. Grace thought about the rent increase, her mother's medical bills, her baby. The walls were closing in. "I'll be there, Miss Parker." "Good. The address is on the invitation. Don't be late." Later that afternoon, Grace was cleaning the upstairs hallway when Ethan emerged from his office. He looked tired, rubbing his eyes under his glasses. "Oh, excuse me," he said, nearly bumping into her cleaning cart. "It's fine, Mr. Montgomery." He paused, looking at her properly for what felt like the first time. He noticed the swell of her belly, the weariness in her eyes. You're helping with the wedding tomorrow?" "Yes, sir, at the hotel." He nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He seemed uncomfortable. "Vanessa says everything is coming together nicely." "I'm sure it will be beautiful," Grace said politely, her voice neutral. Right, well, he trailed off, then continued down the hall to the master bedroom he would soon share with Vanessa. At 4 o'clock, Grace went to the east wing to clean Margaret's rooms. The older woman was reading by the window. "Come in, Grace, I'm just relaxing with my book." As Grace dusted the bookshelves, Margaret watched her. "You're going to the hotel tomorrow?" "Yes, ma'am." Margaret sighed, a sound heavy with unspoken frustration. "That girl works you too hard." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. "Here, I know things are tight with the baby coming." Grace hesitated, her pride warring with her desperation. "Mrs. Montgomery, I can't. You can, and you will. Consider it an early gift for my future grandchild in spirit." Grace's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the envelope. Inside was enough cash to cover her rent increase for the next 6 months. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. At the end of her shift, Grace found Carlos in the kitchen preparing dinner. He discreetly slipped her a container of food. "For you and the little one. You need strength for tomorrow." "Wedding day," Grace said with a sigh. "Yes. Be careful tomorrow." Carlos lowered his voice. "The bride, she is not herself with all this wedding stress." "She's never herself," Grace thought. But she just nodded. "Thank you, Carlos. I don't know what I'd do without you and Mrs. Montgomery." The next morning, Grace stood at the bus stop at 5 km. It was still dark, the city just beginning to stir. All the seats were taken on the first bus, forcing her to stand for 45 minutes as it lurched through traffic. By the time she reached Beverly Hills, her feet were swollen and painful in her only pair of decent shoes. The Grand Plaza Hotel towered above her, a monument of glass and stone. Inside, a whirlwind of activity was underway. Workers rushed around arranging massive floral displays, setting up chairs, and testing sound equipment. The wedding planner spotted her immediately. "You're from the Montgomery house? Good. Start with these flower arrangements. They need to be perfect." For the next few hours, Grace helped place centerpieces, straighten chair covers, and arrange bouquets. The grand ballroom was transforming into something from a fairy tale, with thousands of white roses, crystal chandeliers, and an air of opulent fantasy. As she adjusted a towering bouquet near the entrance, Grace felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. She turned to see Vanessa, standing across the room in a white silk robe, surrounded by a team of makeup artists and hairstylists. Their eyes met, and Vanessa smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a cold, calculating smile that sent a shiver of dread down Grace's spine. A cold feeling settled deep in Grace's stomach as Vanessa whispered something to her assistant while still holding Grace's gaze. The assistant nodded and walked away quickly. Something about that look, that predatory stillness, made Grace want to run. But where would she go? Her baby, her mother, her rent. Everything depended on this job. All she could do was turn back to the flowers, her hands trembling slightly, and hope that whatever twisted plan Vanessa was hatching wouldn't be too humiliating. Grace turned away from Vanessa's unsettling gaze and focused on the arrangement in her hands. The white roses had to be perfect, just like everything else at this $2 million spectacle. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom was almost ready, with only an hour to go before the first guests would begin to arrive. "Make sure those centerpieces are exactly 4 inches apart," the wedding planner instructed, her voice sharp as she checked items off her clipboard. "The photographer will be here in 20 minutes for pre-ceremony shots." "Yes, ma'am," Grace replied, her fingers carefully adjusting the heavy vose. The ballroom was truly breathtaking. 300 white chairs were arranged in perfect, symmetrical rows, facing a magnificent floral arch where Ethan and Vanessa would soon exchange their vows. A custom-made white carpet runner, as pristine as fresh snow, stretched the length of the center aisle. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, sparkled overhead, casting 1,000 points of light across the room. Grace worked as quickly as she could, hoping to finish her tasks and slip away to the kitchens before the ceremony began. Her back was a solid knot of pain, and her pregnant belly made reaching across the wide tables a difficult, awkward maneuver. As she placed the last centerpiece, she heard Vanessa's voice, amplified by the ballroom's acoustics, coming from the bridal suite just off the main hall. "Is everything ready? I need to see the ballroom before any guests arrive." Grace tried to make herself invisible, moving towards the service exit at the back of the room. She almost made it. "You. Wait." Vanessa called out, her voice echoing slightly. "I need you to check something." Grace stopped, her hand on the exit door, and turned slowly. "Yes, Miss Parker." Vanessa swept into the room, a vision in a designer wedding gown that probably cost more than Grace would earn in 5 years. Her blonde hair was a masterpiece of intricate braids and curls, her makeup flawless. She was surrounded by 6 bridesmaids in pale pink dresses, a giggling, adoring court. "Come here," Vanessa commanded. Grace approached cautiously, feeling the curious, condescending eyes of the bridesmaids on her. "What do you think of my dress?" Vanessa asked, executing a slow, deliberate twirl. "It's beautiful, Miss Parker," Grace answered truthfully. It was a stunning gown. Vanessa smiled that cold, thin smile again. "Good. Now, I need you to stay for the ceremony." "Stay? But I finished the flowers, and There might be last-minute things to fix," Vanessa interrupted smoothly. "Just stand by the back door, out of sight. Make yourself useful." One of the bridesmaids whispered something to another, and several of them giggled. What could I possibly fix during the ceremony? Grace wondered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "The guests are arriving," the wedding planner announced, hurrying into the room. "Everyone to their places." The next hour passed in a blur of perfumed air and polite chatter. Grace stood by the service door as instructed, a silent observer as the ballroom filled with the crème de la crème of Los Angeles society. Tech executives, movie stars, politicians, and heiresses took their seats, their expensive jewelry glittering in the soft light. At the front of the room, Ethan stood with his best man, Devon. Ethan looked handsome in his tuxedo, but Grace noticed he seemed tense, almost uncomfortable with all the attention. He kept checking his watch and adjusting his tie, his gaze sweeping over the crowd as if looking for an escape route. "It's time," the wedding planner whispered into her headset. "Music, start." The string orchestra began to play a beautiful, haunting melody, and the ballroom fell silent. The bridesmaids processed down the aisle one by one, followed by a tiny flower girl who scattered white rose petals on the pristine carpet. Grace watched from her corner, thinking this would all be over soon. Then she could go home, put her swollen feet up, and forget about Vanessa Parker for 2 blissful, uninterrupted days. The wedding officiant took his place under the floral arch. "Please stand for the bride," he announced. Everyone rose to their feet. The music swelled, changing to the traditional wedding march. All heads turned toward the grand double doors where Vanessa was meant to enter. But nothing happened. The doors remained closed. After 30 seconds of awkward silence, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. The wedding planner rushed to the bridal suite, her face pale. Moments later, she returned with Vanessa, who appeared perfectly calm, almost serene. "Sorry for the delay," Vanessa announced, her voice carrying across the silent room. "I just noticed a small problem that needs fixing before we can proceed." She walked halfway down the aisle, her movements slow and deliberate. She stopped, reached out, and took a glass of deep red wine from a nearby server's tray. With a theatrical slowness, she turned the glass over, pouring the dark crimson liquid directly onto the center of the immaculate white carpet. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. The wedding planner looked like she was about to faint. "Oh dear," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "What a terrible accident. We can't have a wedding with a stained aisle, can we?" She turned her head and looked directly at Grace, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Fortunately, we have our maid here to clean it up." Grace felt every single eye in that room turn toward her. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Vanessa walked to the officiant and calmly took the microphone from his hand. "Before we continue with our ceremony," she announced, her amplified voice booming through the ballroom, "our maid will clean this mess, on her knees." The room went completely, deathly silent. Grace remained frozen by the back door, trapped in a waking nightmare. "Come on," Vanessa prompted, gesturing impatiently with a flick of her wrist. "Everyone is waiting." Grace looked desperately around the room, searching for an escape. Security guards stood impassively at every exit. Margaret Montgomery was nowhere in sight. Carlos was undoubtedly in the kitchen, completely unaware of the horror unfolding in the ballroom. With no choice, no escape, Grace began to walk forward, each step an agony of humiliation. 300 pairs of eyes followed her every movement. Some guests looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, but no one spoke up. Others had their phones out, shamelessly recording the unfolding spectacle. When she reached the wine stain, Vanessa handed her a small, useless linen towel. "Better hurry," she whispered, her breath hot against Grace's ear. "You're holding up my wedding." Grace's cheeks burned with a fire of shame as she lowered herself awkwardly to her knees. At 6 months pregnant, the position was excruciatingly painful and difficult to maintain. She began dabbing at the dark red stain, knowing it was a futile effort. It would never come out of the white carpet with just a dry towel. "Put more effort into it," Vanessa instructed loudly for the benefit of the crowd. "Really scrub." Grace kept her eyes down, focusing on the spreading stain rather than the hundreds of faces watching her. Tears threatened to spill, but she blinked them back with fierce determination. She would not give Vanessa the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Near the front, Ethan stood motionless. His expression had shifted from confusion to dawning realization, and finally to absolute horror as he fully understood the cruel, calculated theater of what was happening. "Vanessa," he said quietly, his voice tight. "What are you doing?" "Just making sure everything is perfect for our special day, darling," Vanessa replied sweetly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Grace felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her abdomen and winced, her breath catching in her throat. The stress and the awkward, painful position were taking a toll on her body. She continued scrubbing, but the stain only seemed to spread further across the white fibers of the carpet. "This isn't right," someone murmured from the third row. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ethan stepped away from his position at the altar. "That's enough," he said, his voice gaining strength and volume. "Stop this. Right now." Vanessa's perfect smile faltered. "Darling, I'm just trying to—" "No," Ethan interrupted, his voice cutting through her excuse. "I see exactly what you're trying to do." He looked at Grace, still kneeling on the floor, her pregnant belly making the position obviously painful. For the first time, Ethan really saw Grace, not as background staff, not as an invisible fixture in his house, but as a human being, a woman, being deliberately and cruelly humiliated for public entertainment. "Are you okay?" he asked, walking toward her. Grace didn't answer, all her energy focused on fighting back tears and managing the radiating pain in her abdomen. The room started to spin slightly as she tried to push herself up. "Here," Ethan said, reaching down without hesitation. "Let me help you." "What are you doing?" Vanessa demanded, her voice no longer sweet and syrupy. It was sharp, cold, and laced with fury. "Get back to your place. We have a wedding to finish." Ethan ignored her completely, supporting Grace's elbow as she struggled to her feet. Her face was pale, and she swayed slightly, disoriented. "Do you need to sit down?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with a genuine concern she had never heard from him before. Grace could only nod, unable to speak past the thick lump in her throat. "Ethan Montgomery!" Vanessa's voice was a shriek that ripped through the room like ice. "What in God's name do you think you're doing? Leave the help alone and get back here!" Ethan turned to face his bride, still supporting Grace with one hand. The look on his face, a cold, quiet fury, made several guests gasp audibly. "There will be no wedding today," he said, his voice calm but utterly firm. "What?" Vanessa shrieked, her face contorting in disbelief. "I said," Ethan repeated, his voice rising slightly, "there will be no wedding today, or ever." He then turned to face the shocked guests. "I apologize for bringing you all here under false pretenses. It seems I didn't really know the woman I was about to marry." Chaos erupted. Vanessa screamed at Ethan, a raw, incoherent sound of rage and humiliation. Her father, a formidable-looking man, began pushing his way through the crowd toward them. Guests were standing up, some heading for the exits, others pulling out their phones to record the escalating drama. "You can't do this to me." Vanessa grabbed Ethan's arm, her nails digging into the fabric of his tuxedo. "Do you know how much this wedding cost? What people will say?" "I don't care," Ethan replied, pulling his arm away from her grasp. "I care about basic human decency, something you clearly know nothing about." Grace felt another sharp pain, more intense this time, and she grabbed her stomach, gasping. The room was definitely spinning now. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked, his attention immediately shifting back to her. I need to sit down," Grace whispered. "I don't feel well." Ethan looked around quickly, then guided her toward an empty chair in the front row. "I'm going to get you some water." "You're choosing the maid over me?" Vanessa shouted, her perfect makeup now streaked with tears of rage. "The pregnant maid?" Just then, Margaret Montgomery appeared, pushing her way through the stunned crowd. "Grace, what happened?" She took one look at the wine-stained carpet, at Grace's pale face, at Ethan's furious expression, and understood immediately. "Ethan, she needs medical attention, now." As Grace sank gratefully into the chair, she saw Carlos rushing forward from the kitchen area, his white chef's coat a beacon in the chaos. The kind chef's face was a mixture of deep concern and righteous anger as he took in the scene. "I have her things," Carlos said, holding Grace's purse and coat. "We should take her to the hospital." The room continued to erupt in noise and movement around them, a cacophony of shouts and whispers. Grace closed her eyes, trying to block it all out. The pain in her abdomen had subsided to a dull ache, but she felt dizzy and nauseated. "My car is outside," Ethan said decisively. "Mother, help Grace. I'll deal with this situation." As Margaret helped Grace to her feet, Vanessa's father, Richard Parker, stepped directly in front of them, blocking their path. "You're making a terrible mistake, son," he warned Ethan, his voice low and menacing. "This will have consequences, for you and for your company." Ethan's face hardened into a mask of cold resolve. "Threatening me isn't a wise move, Richard. Now please move aside so I can help the woman your daughter just humiliated for sport." For a moment, it looked as if Richard Parker was going to argue further. Then, seeing the unshakable determination in Ethan's eyes, he reluctantly stepped aside. Grace leaned heavily on Margaret as they moved toward the exit, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes still watching her. The humiliation burned, but the physical discomfort was becoming more urgent. "The car is this way," Margaret said gently. "Everything will be okay now." As they reached the ballroom door, Grace heard Vanessa's final, piercing shriek behind them. "You'll regret this, Ethan. Both of you will." Outside in the fresh air, Grace took a deep, shuddering breath. Carlos stood protectively beside her while Margaret waved to Ethan's driver, who was already bringing the car around. "The hospital?" the driver asked, opening the door. "Yes," Margaret replied firmly. "Cedars-Sinai, as quickly as you can." The black luxury sedan moved swiftly through the Beverly Hills traffic, a silent cocoon amidst the city's noise. Grace sat in the back seat, breathing deeply as Margaret held her hand in a firm, reassuring grip. Carlos had joined them, sitting up front next to the driver, his jaw tight with anger. "How are you feeling now, dear?" Margaret asked gently. "The pain, it comes and goes," Grace answered, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry for all this trouble." "Don't you dare apologize," Margaret said fiercely. "None of this is your fault." Carlos turned in his seat. "The doctor will take good care of you. The baby will be fine. You'll see." Grace nodded, but a cold fear gripped her heart. 6 months pregnant was too early. Every twinge, every ache made her worry about her unborn child. The car's built-in phone rang, and the driver answered it. "Yes, Mr. Montgomery. We're 5 minutes from the hospital. Yes, Mrs. Montgomery is with her, and Carlos, too." He paused, listening. "Yes, sir. We'll wait for you there." "Ethan is coming?" Grace asked, surprised. Margaret nodded. "Of course he is. He feels responsible for what happened." "But it wasn't his fault," Grace protested weakly. "He let that venomous woman into our lives," Margaret said, her voice tight. "He should have seen her true nature months ago." When they arrived at the hospital, a nurse met them at the emergency entrance with a wheelchair. "Mrs. Montgomery called ahead," she explained, helping Grace into the chair. "I'm not Mrs. Montgomery," Grace corrected quietly. "I work for the family." The nurse looked confused for a moment, but didn't ask questions. She wheeled Grace through the sliding doors, while Margaret and Carlos followed closely behind. "Pregnant woman, possible complications," the nurse announced to the desk staff. 6 months along, experiencing abdominal pain and dizziness. Everything moved quickly after that. Grace was taken to an examination room while Margaret handled the intimidating stack of paperwork. A doctor checked Grace's blood pressure, his brow furrowed with concern. It was dangerously high. "How long have you been experiencing this level of stress?" the doctor asked, pressing gently on Grace's abdomen. Grace hesitated, unsure how to explain the day's surreal events. "She was forced to kneel and clean a floor in front of hundreds of people," Margaret said sharply from the doorway. "She's 6 months pregnant, and they made her kneel and scrub." The doctor's frown deepened. "I see. We need to monitor you very carefully. High blood pressure can cause serious complications during pregnancy." Grace closed her eyes as another wave of pain washed over her. "Please, is my baby okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We're going to do an ultrasound right now," the doctor assured her. While they waited for the ultrasound machine to be brought in, Grace's phone, which Margaret had retrieved from her purse, kept buzzing insistently. Margaret checked it for her. "Oh my," Margaret said, her eyes widening. "Someone posted a video of what happened at the wedding. It's all over the internet." Grace groaned. "Great. Now the entire world can watch me being humiliated." They're not focused on you, dear, Margaret said, scrolling through the comments. They're calling Vanessa every horrible name imaginable and praising Ethan for stopping the wedding. The doctor returned with the ultrasound machine. As he spread the cool gel on Grace's stomach, the door opened and Ethan walked in, his face pale with worry. I came as soon as I could, he said. How is she? We're just checking on the baby now, the doctor replied. Everyone watched the black and white screen with bated breath. After a tense moment, the doctor pointed. There's your baby. The heartbeat is strong. Grace let out a sob of pure relief. Thank God. However, the doctor continued, his tone serious. You're having early contractions. It's not labor yet, but it's very concerning. We need to stop them. He turned to look directly at Grace. And I mean this in the strongest possible terms. You need complete rest and zero stress. Otherwise, this baby could come dangerously early. Ethan stepped forward immediately. She'll have whatever care she needs. The best specialists, a private room, anything. Whatever it takes. The doctor nodded. I'm admitting her now. We'll start medication to stop the contractions and monitor both mother and baby around the clock. When the doctor left to arrange the admission, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Grace had never been alone with both Ethan and his mother before. She suddenly felt acutely conscious of her position, unemployed, pregnant, and now completely dependent on their charity. Thank you, she said finally, her voice small, for helping me. But I need to figure out what to do now. My job? Don't worry about that, Ethan interrupted. You still have a job if you want it. But first, you need to recover. Ethan, Margaret said sharply. She can't go back to cleaning that house in her condition. That's out of the question. Before Ethan could respond, a nurse entered with admission paperwork. We have a room ready for you upstairs. Private room, as requested. As they prepared to move Grace, her phone buzzed again. Margaret checked it and frowned. What is it? Grace asked. Someone named Mark keeps calling. Grace's heart sank like a stone. Mark, my ex. How did he get my number again? Who's Mark? Ethan asked, his tone guarded. The baby's father, Grace replied, a bitter taste in her mouth. He left the day I told him I was pregnant. Margaret handed Grace her phone. He's left 3 voicemails. Once Grace was settled in her private room upstairs, she listened to Mark's messages. His voice, once so familiar and comforting, now brought back a rush of painful memories. Grace, I saw the video online. Call me back. We need to talk. Grace, are you okay? I'm worried about you and the baby. I'm coming to the hospital. We should make things right. Grace turned off her phone and closed her eyes. 6 months of complete, deafening silence. And now, because of a viral video, he wants to talk. A nurse entered with medication. This will help stop the contractions. The doctor wants you to rest completely for at least 24 hours. After the nurse left, Margaret sat in a chair beside the bed. I'll stay with you for a while. Carlos went to get your things from your apartment. My apartment, Grace said suddenly, another wave of panic hitting her. The rent is due tomorrow. I got a notice about an increase. Don't worry about that now, Margaret soothed. Ethan, who had been standing by the window, turned to face them. I need to handle some things back at the hotel. Devin is worried about the business fallout from all this. I'll be back later. After Ethan left, Margaret took Grace's hand. He's a good man, just blind sometimes. Today opened his eyes. It's not his responsibility to take care of me, Grace said, though a part of her was relieved he was. Maybe not, Margaret agreed. But it's the right thing to do. And Ethan, for all his faults, always tries to do the right thing. 3 hours later, Grace was dozing when a commotion in the hallway woke her. A man's voice was arguing with a nurse. I'm the father of her baby. I have a right to see her. Grace recognized Mark's voice immediately. Margaret stood up, moving protectively toward the door. "I'll handle this," she said firmly. Before Margaret could reach the door, it swung open. Mark stood there, looking exactly as Grace remembered, handsome in a careless way, with dark hair and a charming smile that had once made her heart race. "Grace," he said, stepping into the room. "I've been so worried." "How did you find me?" Grace asked, her voice cold as ice. "The video has your name in it. Someone tagged you in the comments. When I saw what happened, what she did to you, I realized I made a terrible mistake." "Just now?" Grace's voice shook with suppressed anger. "You realized it now, after seeing a viral video? Not 6 months ago when I told you I was pregnant and you said, and I quote, 'That's not my problem?'" Mark had the decency to look ashamed. "I was scared, Grace. I wasn't ready to be a father. And I wasn't ready to be a single mother, but here we are." Margaret cleared her throat loudly. "Perhaps you should leave and come back when Miss Williams is feeling better." Mark glanced at Margaret, then back at Grace. "Who's this? Your mother?" "Mrs. Montgomery is my employer, or she was." Grace felt tears threatening again. Everything was falling apart around her. The door opened again and Ethan walked in, carrying a small overnight bag. He stopped short when he saw Mark. "What's going on here?" Ethan asked, his eyes narrowing. Mark looked Ethan up and down, taking in his expensive clothes and confident stance. "Who are you?" "I'm Ethan Montgomery. And you are?" "Mark Miller, the baby's father." Mark emphasized the last part, as if staking a claim. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Grace felt another sharp pain and winced, placing a protective hand on her stomach. "Everyone needs to leave," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "The doctor said no stress, and all of you are stressing me out." The heart rate monitor beside her bed had increased its beeping, a frantic electronic testament to her agitation. A nurse hurried in, alerted by the change. "Everyone out," the nurse ordered, shooing them towards the door. "The patient needs complete rest." As they filed out, Grace called out, "Margaret, can you stay, please?" Left alone with the older woman, Grace finally allowed herself to cry, the tears she'd been holding back all day finally overflowing. "What am I going to do? I have no job, no home I can afford, a baby coming, and now Mark wants to be involved?" Margaret stroked Grace's hair gently. "One problem at a time, my dear. First, you need to get better. Then we'll figure out the rest. Together." Outside in the hallway, Ethan confronted Mark. "What exactly are your intentions here?" "That's between me and Grace," Mark replied defensively. "If you hurt her again—" "What's it to you?" Mark interrupted, his own anger flaring. "Why do you care about her so much?" Ethan didn't have a ready answer. Why did he care so much? He barely knew Grace before today, yet seeing her humiliated, seeing her in pain, had awakened something fierce and protective in him. "Just be careful with her," Ethan said finally. "She's been through enough." As Mark stormed off, Ethan's phone rang. It was Devon. "The stock is dropping," Devon said without preamble. "Richard Parker is telling everyone you're unstable. We need damage control, Ethan, immediately." "The wedding video is out there," Ethan replied wearily. "People can see what really happened. Vanessa is giving interviews saying you've been having an affair with the maid, and that's why you stopped the wedding." Ethan felt a headache forming behind his eyes. That's ridiculous. Rich billionaires having affairs with the household staff isn't exactly an unheard-of trope, Ethan. And the fact that you rushed her to the hospital because she's pregnant and in distress? Well, it makes the story even juicier for the tabloids, Devon said. "Look, I believe you, but we need to manage this before it torpedoes the IPO." After ending the call, Ethan sat heavily in a waiting room chair. How had his life unraveled so completely in just a few hours? This morning, he was preparing to marry Vanessa. Now, he was defending a pregnant housekeeper he barely knew from her opportunistic ex-boyfriend, while his business partner worried about stock prices and his ex-fiancée spread slanderous lies. When Margaret emerged from Grace's room, she sat beside her son. The nurse gave her something to help her sleep. "Good," Ethan said. "Has she been working for us this whole time? Pregnant and alone?" Margaret nodded sadly. "I tried to tell you about Vanessa's behavior many times, Ethan. You were always too busy." "I'm sorry, Mother. It's not me you should be apologizing to." When Grace woke hours later, the room was dark except for the soft glow of a small lamp. To her surprise, Ethan was sitting in the chair beside her bed, working quietly on a laptop. "Mr. Montgomery?" she said, her voice groggy. He looked up, his face etched with concern. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Better, I think. Where's your mother?" "I sent her home to rest. Carlos brought some of your things." He pointed to the overnight bag on the floor. "He also mentioned you sing to your baby sometimes." Grace blushed. "Just quietly. It helps me stay calm." Ethan closed his laptop. "Grace, I want to apologize. I had no idea how Vanessa was treating you. It wasn't your responsibility to know." "It was my house. You were my employee," he insisted. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've been living in my own world for too long. Today was educational." Grace studied him curiously. In the soft lamplight, he looked different. Less like the billionaire boss, and more like a troubled man facing difficult truths. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "You rest and get better. Everything else can wait." As Grace drifted back to sleep, her phone, which the nurse had placed on the bedside table after charging it, lit up with a new message. Ethan glanced at the screen and saw a name he didn't recognize. Alex Thompson. The message preview caught his eye. "That voice I heard you singing to your baby through the door, it's extraordinary. I'm a music producer and I'd like to talk when you're feeling better." Ethan looked at Grace's sleeping form with a new curiosity. There was clearly more to his housekeeper, to this quiet, resilient woman, than he had ever bothered to discover.